recognize that you're giving time from your schedule to be here. So we really do appreciate that. So I have a few items to go over before we start the presentation. Please know that this meeting is being recorded. That way we can post it to the project webpage. It should take about a week for it to be posted, and we'll add the link to the project webpage in the chat in case you'd like to view it again or share with neighbors who weren't able to attend. During the presentation, we ask you to keep your video off and microphone muted. And then during the discussion session, we encourage you to turn your video on if you feel comfortable doing so. And I wanted to note interpretation was not requested for this meeting, but please know that translation and interpretation services are offered free of charge. You can email me to make a request for future services, and we will also add my email to the chat if you need to reach out for anything. You can go back one slide, actually. So, yeah, so we do want to ensure that this conversation is a pleasant experience for all, and that all community members are comfortable sharing their comments, questions, and feedback. So let's just be respectful and mindful of each other's time and keep the questions and comments project specific. Again, if anyone is interested in additional discussion, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Next slide, please. So in a moment, our design team will give a short presentation, and then we'll have a listening and discussion session. So if a question or comment comes to mind during the presentation, feel free to add it to the chat, and we'll address it after the presentation. On the screen now, we're showing instructions for using the features in Zoom. And once the presentation is concluded, we welcome your questions and comments verbally or through the chat. If anyone is calling in on a phone, use *9 to raise your hand. And once we call on you, you can use *6 to unmute and then mute yourself again. If you're joining via Zoom on a computer, use the raise hand button and we will unmute you. Next slide. So I do want to thank you once again for joining us tonight. The topics that we will be covering include the project team introduction, a project overview, including the schedule, the presentation from the design team, and then a listening and discussion session, followed by closing remarks and next steps. So once again, I'm Amy Linnae, project manager from Boston Parks. Joining me is Kathy Bakery-Clips, director of the capital plan for Boston Parks. Christine Brandeo is away, so joining in her place is Steve Gruskowski, and he's running the Zoom for us. And then also joining us tonight is Maggie Van Scoy from the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services. And then Weston and Sampson is the landscape architecture firm on this project, and they started working with the Friends of the Public Garden back in 2019 on a concept plan for the Kenmore block. So joining us from the design team, we have Cassie Bethany, project manager, and Lainey Cohen, site designer. So looking at the project schedule, this is the first community briefing for Kenmore block. Tonight, we are presenting the preferred concept plan that was developed during the 2019 community engagement process organized by the Friends of the Public Garden. And then we'll have a second community presentation, which will be a project update focusing on the tree inventory. That meeting will take place in the next month or two. And then the design team will move ahead with documentation and a cost estimate. So the cost estimate will allow Boston Parks to request funding for fiscal year 2024 for the park construction. And then during the spring, the design documentation will be further refined. We'll go to the Landmarks Commission for their approval while continuing with coordination with city and state agencies. And then we anticipate the project will go out to bid in early fall, and then construction beginning in late winter, early spring 2024. So then the project approach, there are several components that go into the public park design, one being community input, which includes the Friends of the Public Garden process in 2019, and the input we'll hear tonight. In addition, we have safety guidelines and regulatory guidelines, such as ADA, the City of Boston priorities, and the parks and recreation goals, which we'll go over in the next 2 slides. So the City of Boston priorities, this includes expanding walkable access to parks, addressing equity, climate resilience, such as dealing with stormwater and extreme heat, health, housing and community building. And then looking at the Boston Parks and Recreation goals, these includes creating spaces that are accessible and available to all, that have a diverse, balanced, and efficient mix of uses that include meaningful and inclusive community engagement, incorporate adaptive and resilient landscapes, and promote connections. So with that, I will turn it over to Cassie Bethany, project manager from Weston and Sampson.
Great, thank you so much, Amy. This is a moment for this project that we've been waiting for a long time. I'd just love to underscore Councillor Bach's excitement as the project manager who worked with the Friends in the city back in 2019 to see the project come back and be constructed. It's truly an awesome moment. So we're excited to be here, and we are excited to have you all on the call. And this will be almost a refresh of where we landed at the last moment of that master planning process back in 2019. We'd like to refresh and true up really the preferred plan. It's now 2022. We want to hear from you all tonight and through this kickoff process at the beginning of this effort. Do the things that we're showing in our plan, do those make sense? Does that resonate now? We've been through a pandemic. There's many other efforts going on in this area around Kenmore Block. Do all of the elements that we have included make sense? And this is the opportunity now to tweak it and massage it and make sure that the planned improvements truly meet the needs of today's users of the park. So what we have in front of you now is a quick study that we did on what's going on around Kenmore Square. There's quite a lot, as you can see. There's projects that were constructed and completed. There are ongoing planning efforts. There are planning efforts that just kicked off. There's, for example, the Fenway Kenmore Action Plan, which has a 4-year duration that just started or is getting underway. And so our goal is to work with these agencies and make sure that our planning efforts and construction documentation is aligned with those efforts. So we'll keep that in the back of our pocket and move forward as we coordinate on our planning and documentation. Next slide. Back in the master planning effort, it's just really interesting and helpful to understand how the site developed. The earliest postcards that we were able to find were around 1910, and you can see that it was a green lawn with tree planting generally in this area. You can see the blue of the Muddy River there in the middle of the upper left-hand postcard to help orient you. And then the image on the upper right is when the tunnel was under construction. And these slides will be posted. So just we'll go through them quickly, but you'll be able to take time and really look at these photos at your leisure because they're very cool. So the tunnel was completed in 1914, and you can see the architectural remnants of that on the site today. That tunnel was accessed down into the Green Line, and then it was actively used. Here, there's an image in the lower left in the 1920s thereabout, but it was used up through the 30s. So it actually wasn't used for all that long. Next slide. And then you can see by it's still being used in the 30s in the upper left, but then by 1934, you can actually see in the upper right-hand corner that you can see the little arch of the tunnel very faintly in the background. That's actually, yep, Lainey's got it moused over. It's actually covered over at that point. So it, we don't know exactly what happened there, but it was no longer an access down into the T. And then in the 50s, you can start to see that it's turned back over into a park space. You can see park benches and the tree line is ever present throughout. Next slide. So this tunnel, oh, can you go back for a minute? So subsurface conditions are critically important to understand. Here we have great imagery of what it looked like, and this infrastructure is still in place underground, and we want to celebrate that. We want to celebrate the train tracks running through and share that, interpret that in a way that is reflective of the use of the space during that time, because it's unique to this block. Next slide. And then in the 1970s, Carol Johnson did a upgrade to the park, the surface conditions that's very similar to what you see today, paving wise. The dark gray are the pathways. So you can see tree plantings and pathways are more or less the same. Some of the plantings have changed, but it's very similar to what we have out there today. Next slide. And then we have all of the plans from the master planning effort with the T, and we'll continue to coordinate with them. This is just a sampling of what we have and what we'll be continuing to use to be able to understand how our surface treatment upgrades will relate to the subsurface conditions. And then we are also working with them on ensuring that the T has service access and emergency access and so on, so that those operations can continue to happen in the best way possible. Next slide. Just to recount what was discussed in the master planning process in 2019, we did go through a 3-meeting process. During that effort, we had a listening session. We then worked up 3 concepts that were presented, and pieces of those concepts were consolidated into a preferred plan that was then presented. And we refined that a little bit and coordinated with the T and BTD and other agencies on that plan. The major comments kind of fell into 3 categories that we heard. So this is where we'll true up with what we heard then with what we'll hear now. In terms of amenities, there was an open house exhibit that was happening, an art installation, and people loved that. And we wanted to really get into the idea of how to program the space in a more active way. And so that open house exhibit was showing us how that could be done in a nice way. And people love the green open space. And so we were trying to maximize that asset within Kenmore, which is very much a paved square within the city. From an access and connectivity perspective, we want to, of course, coordinate with all the other projects that are underway and in the vicinity, as noted before. And then arrival and access into the park is challenging. Was challenging at this time. I think safely we can say it continues to be challenging. There's a cross connection through that people make to get down into the T on the Fenway side. And so connectivity through is important. And from a safety perspective, there are certain, the inbound side of Comm Ave, speed of cars is a dangerous condition for pedestrians versus the outbound side, which is much calmer traffic. And so kind of understanding the nuances of safety on both sides and all ends of the park is important. We wanted to preserve and enhance those positive uses that are happening in the park, like passive recreation and people watching and art exhibits, like mentioned before. And then we were debating about perimeter fencing, and I don't think we totally landed 100% on perimeter fencing, yes or no, and safety considerations and access considerations were debated quite a lot. And so I'll just leave that there for us to continue to talk about. And we also did significant boots on the ground site analysis, and here are a few snippets of that. Just looking towards the city on the bus end of the park, there's quite a people either walk around the edges, but access in. You can see kind of here with the yew planting hedge in the front is not so open, and you really have to find your way to the sides to get in. I mentioned the vehicle speed was noted here, and the mature shade trees, of course, are amazing and beautiful, and we want to protect those and enhance those. Next slide. In the middle of the block, we start to see the Lombard light, which didn't have it was dropped there and located there at the time it came to the city, but it doesn't have a real home. And so this process was making a space for it. The brick paving itself was lifting and moving, and so we'll improve that in the detailing of this site. And there's also ADA or accessibility challenges with the way that it's crowned. And so this effort will ensure that we'll have complete ADA compliance throughout the park. We talked about mid-block crossing. There's those who we heard it was a concern and those who wanted it. And so we went back and forth about having or not having a mid-block crossing. You can see the archway, it's a little bit covered over with the call out right there, but the portal is really beautiful and it's in poor condition right now. So we'll refurbish that. And there's a hump of where the tunnel infrastructure is actually sitting underneath the grass. And so we'd like to take advantage of that elevation change, which is, it's an otherwise very flat block. And so it's actually quite nice to have that elevation change. Next slide. And then now looking at the back side of that archway towards Kenmore block, we have hatches kind of on this side where the T folks will go down and service the T platform itself. There are a hodgepodge of benches, so we'd like to bring a level of consistency to that. We have a memorial bench in the site in the park that we'd like to relocate and make more, put in a more prominent location. And then people love the flat lawn to throw a Frisbee. It's one of the only spaces where we have that in the square. So we'd like to retain that. Next slide. And I think this is the last image at the end of the park on, so your back is to Bowker Overpass. We have similar access into the park challenges on this end where you really have to go around the sides to get in. We have some challenging curb cuts. On every other block of Comm Ave, you access through, but on this particular block, you go in on the sides. And so it's a different way of engaging with the block, and not necessarily from a landscape perspective relates to the rest of Comm Ave Mall. And then I think just again on the last slide, the yew planting in particular creates this wall that creates a visual barrier into the park. Next slide. So to orient folks, we have on the bottom of this page, we'll Comm Ave inbound and Comm Ave outbound on the northern side. We're page true north here. We have Kenmore Street on the west side and Charles Gate West on the east side, and then you can see Bowker Overpass on the far right of the sheet on the easternmost side. And notable here is that we're about 50% hardscape green space, so we're going to want to flip that and have maximize our green space. And then we have 24 trees as well that will enhance, prune, improve their health, and maybe and celebrate really, and not remove. Next slide. So the Friends of the Public Garden kindly lent their arborist at that time to do a tree health assessment. So they were rated from, he went out and assessed each from excellent to poor, and there were a few newly planted trees at that time. And we did find that several of these were poor. I think at this moment we'll redo that assessment and just true that up with current conditions. I think ultimately we're looking to keep all the trees unless they're in an actively dying and need to be removed ultimately, but our intention would be to retain this allay. It's emblematic of the entire Comm Ave Mall. We're not looking to change this in any way. Next slide. And then just to give people a flavor of the three concepts, we did start with from a point of hearing from the community at that time. We collected input, and then we put together three different concepts, which are shown here, option A, B, and C, that looked at different circulation patterns and different ways of arranging paving and green space and benches and site amenities and things like that. And then we took elements from each of these to develop the preferred plan. And I'll pass it now to Lainey, who will go through that preferred plan in more detail. Lainey, can we hear you?
Are you all able to hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So this is our preferred plan that came out of those prior community engagement methods. So as Cassie mentioned, this is the lone block to the west of the Boker overpass over here. So Commonwealth Avenue Mall runs all the way to the public garden, and we wanted to create more of a connection with that typology and design lineage. So what you see here is we've opened up the two ends to connect to the design language for the rest of the Commonwealth Avenue Mall. And so that is essential access surrounded on either side by trees. So we've done that to connect it visually and spiritually in this area, but there are very real site conditions, which we've gone through, that dictate that central access can't run through the MBTA hatch. And so we've put it around on either side, which creates really nice opportunities for gathering areas, open lawn, which continues that open lawn character that people really respond to at Kenmore Block. So starting on the left side, we again wanted to also reference the history of the site. So those railroad lines that used to run through the site to the arch will be represented in paving. So those will be a different unit paver that'll stand out from the surroundings. And that will draw you to this historic arch. We want to make that a focal point. So we've added this gathering space with multiple types of seating, cafe tables, and back benches to activate that space and give people another reason to come on over to Kenmore Block. So moving down, if you remember, we have some elevation change in here just based on the height of the MBTA hatch underneath. So we're taking advantage of that, and we're going to slate in terraced stone seating to create an amphitheater-like feel that overlooks the open lawn that will come to the right. Cutting through there, at the moment, we have the mid-block crossing. This will come into chats with BTD and, of course, community input. Moving down to the end, the final historic element would be the relocated Lombard lamp. This is an intentional placement that anchors the site and kind of declares it as a unique sense of space and gives it more of a identity. So The tree canopy, as Cassie mentioned, we're maintaining as many existing trees as humanly possible and protecting them and increasing their health with some strategic pruning, adding in certain places just to make it feel more lush. And then the fence on the inbound side in particular right now we have for pedestrian safety along with a small planting buffer just to make sure everyone stays in the park and feels safe while doing so. Furnishings wise, we have those cafe tables in this gathering area by the hatch, which you've seen, and then backed benches in a more consistent layout around all of the pathways that allow people to sit and enjoy either the shade on this side or even the sun on the opposite side. And of course, there will be pedestrian lighting throughout just to keep it lit up and activate the space even at night.
Lainey, can I just add that the cafe seatings, I think the intention is that those are not fixed. And so those could be cleared out for an event. And that could become a performance space or an activated space for an event. And so that's something that we can discuss and see, because typically at city parks, we like those to be fixed in place. And so that's something that will be under discussion throughout this process.
So just to help visualize what some of this could look like at the end of the day, here you see that historic arch as it stands. And this would be the site with those terrace seating looking out over the lawn, and then the gathering area with flexible cafe seating, the interior walkways, different seat walls, and that planting buffer and perimeter fence. This is another view. Again, you see that visual impairment by the shrubs as they stand. And in the proposed plan, it's open. People are walking through from either side or from the other side of the street. The longboard light just really inviting people in. And then, of course, the tree-lined avenue, connecting it with the rest of Commonwealth Avenue Mall. So a closer look at some of the potential materials and furnishings we would use on site, starting from the upper left-hand corner. We're looking at unit pavers as a way to distinguish the gathering areas from the pathways. And of course, having pedestrian lights in there to keep the space lit. The next picture is cafe tables. And as Cassie mentioned, these could be flexible. People could move them around, put them together, or move them away for events. That upper right image is not necessarily what we would do for the railroad paving, alluding to that history, but it gives you an idea of what kind of paving contrast could work in that space. The bottom left-hand corner, that concrete seat wall is another option for a backed bench type of seating. So would love to hear if y'all have any preferences on seating. The central image in the bottom is that terraced stone seating, which is very simple, hedged into the slope, allowing people to look out. And then finally, you see benches on the right-hand side, back benches that look contemporary, but also fit into the character of the mall. So I'll hand it back to Amy.
Great, thanks, Lainey. So we'd love to hear from all of you, your thoughts. I think one of the topics that was brought up in that process was the mid-block crossing, and I wanted to emphasize that there would be some impacts to parking if that were in place. So that's something that we, want to hear from you all about, if that's, worth sacrificing that the parking in that area. So, but also on the other general thoughts as well.
Do we have a brave first question or comment?
looks like Kennedy.
Kennedy, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks so much to the Parks Department and the consultants for this presentation. It was the first I was seeing it. I know Councilor Bach had been involved with the process back in 2019, but it was really great to see. Just one comment on the movable cafe type seating. I know that Symphony Community Park in the East Fens employs similar seating, and it's really popular. I think people really like it, and it enables them to do their bi-weekly food distribution so they can move all the tables. But I do know, while not a burden, it does fall on the residents to kind of maintain, and I think the tables and chairs get a little wobbly a little bit sooner. I don't know the lifespan of other infrastructure, seating table infrastructure in other parks, but just a consideration of who's doing the maintenance on that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Margaret, go ahead and unmute.
Hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm in the car on the phone in the dark, so I'm not so sure how this works, but I'll try to make a comment. I think that the movable tables and chairs are great. I don't remember them from the last presentation in 2019, but I think that that's a great idea. And I do think the concerns about maintenance and about theft and about all the things that go around when you have these things that are pinned to the ground is just another consideration. So I'd love to see them stay in the plan. I think it would also help draw people into the park who would want to sit and talk with one another, not sit on a bench necessarily and talk with one another. So I'm encouraged by that. The only thing I want to make sure that doesn't get lost in this when we get to the infrastructure capacity to do the Christmas lighting of the trees in this block. We have hit a brick wall on that this year. We thought we would be able to gerrymander something in the block. That has turned out not to be possible. So some system, whether it mimics what's on the rest of the mall with the underground conduit piping and that system that John Lantine has been using for now 20 years, is replicated in this block, if it's possible to do that, or some other way to make sure that we're able to light the trees in that block. And we're having the same issues in the Charles Gate block. So I don't know if, I think we talked about that in the previous iterations of this, but I just don't want that to get lost in the discussions as the design team goes forward. I think it's great that you're saving all the trees. So that's always good news. That always makes people happy. And it's wonderful that Kenzie's office is going to be able to help you deal with the Kenmore Abbey, because it is a challenge to involve those people that are living there, and we certainly want them involved. So I'm glad to hear that too.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Margaret.
And thank you, Margaret, for the reminder about the Christmas lights. We'll get very clear instructions from John about what was the most efficient design.
Kennedy?
Thank you. Thank you. I don't want to speak out of turn if there are others who need to speak. But in terms of the benches that will be there, sorry, I kind of forget what different types you outlined, but just taking note of the senior population at Kenmore Abbey. And I know Age Strong has the special benches kind of with, I don't know if it's the armrest in the middle that assists getting up and down from them. And I toured City Hall Plaza today, which was really exciting. I don't know if others have seen it, but just it brought to my mind that they really highlighted the infrastructure that they did around permeable pavers, which was kind of cool. They made it interactive in a sense that they were, actually I took a picture, let me see how they said it. Like around the permeable pavers, there's a plaque that says collect and reuse a quarter of the rain, blah, blah, blah. So I just thought that was kind of cool. I don't know what of these comments are useful, but just wanted to share that.
Yeah, no, that's great.
No, definitely helpful, Kennedy. And stormwater infiltration and management is certainly a part of the design thinking here as we advance the plans.
Let's see. Steve, are you able to unmute Councillor Bach?
Yep, I press the
Oh, okay, thanks. Oh, okay.
Hi, thank you all for that. For the presentation, I thought it was great. Kennedy said some of the things I wanted to say again about the seniors, but I just wanted to say that I think I really appreciate the idea of having landed on a preferred concept that does have that through line like a continuous block. I think you guys are also aware of all the work that we're doing on the Charlesgate project, and so I think, you know, in the long run, having that continuity be possible, I think is something that as we hopefully get the next block over, which, as you know, right now is floating and has no pedestrian accessibility at all. As we reimagine that, it would be really nice not to then have to go back to the drawing board and make this block connect. So that feels important to me. And then otherwise, yeah, just really wanting to make sure that we do have a space for lingering for seniors that's hospitable. I wouldn't want us to go in a sort of like, you know, in a direction that was hostile to people sitting down comfortably, because they're just not going to stand on their feet. And then I'm a big fan of mid-block crossing. You know, would love to get in the weeds a little bit with you guys on BTD about what that looks like. And obviously, but my gut here is that I'm not that concerned about losing a couple of parking spaces in order to have that mid-block. I think this is, again, it's about how do you make Kenmore Square more of a place that people walk through first and foremost, which of course it is after every Red Sox game and all kinds of occasions, right? It has quite a lot of foot traffic. I think, you know, so for my office, at least, we'd be focused on any kind of impacts on like businesses and residences in terms of like, you know, does somebody have some critical loading or something that we need to accommodate, but less you know, I think for me, just a space or something would be worth the trade-off of having that mid-block accessibility, because there is a little bit of a weirdness right now. It is just like a long block to have to choose which end you're getting in on. So yeah, those are just a few assorted thoughts, but really appreciate the presentation and thought there was a lot of good stuff here.
That's great. Yeah, and I think there will be quite a bit of coordination between the Charlesgate work, BPDA, BTD, and BTA. So we'll be making sure to coordinate on all those. Does anybody else have any comments for us? Take that as a no. So I do want to thank you once again for joining us. There's the project webpage in the chat, so feel free to click on that to get updates, and we'll let you know about the next meeting and my email as well. So feel free to reach out to me. And if you want to get on our email list, we'll send out updates that way. And thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.